Do you want to stop spending hours producing cheesy, soulless, and unfinished loops that don't ever hit in the club? I'll show you how I used one secret disco sampling trick that the pros never talk about to flip my tracks from weak and amateur to powerful and label ready. After 15 years in music production and faithfully recreating dozens of Beatport top 10 hits, I can honestly say nothing's leveled up my music faster than this. Here's what we'll cover. First, how to extract and chop up samples like the pros. Second, the AI hack to swap stolen samples with identical royalty-free ones. And lastly, the mixing chain that makes it sound label ready without the normal time or effort you normally to put into this. Now, to make producing pro quality music even easier, I've put together this free song finishing toolkit with checklists, samples, and racks that you can use right now in your music. Just visit the link on screen or in the description. But to show you how the pros build their arrangements and how to apply this to your own music right away, today we'll be remaking David Penn and Ophia's Beatport charting hit, Satisfied. To follow along at your own pace or dive deep into the details, you can download this video's project files as well as over 30 full project files inspired by Beatport Top 100 songs, with new files being added weekly. Just visit the link on screen now or in the description. Alright. So let's jump into this. First thing I want to go over is the kick drum. And right off the bat, I'm going to show you something a little bit different than I've shown on this channel before. And honestly, I try not to swear, but you're going to fucking love this. So what I've done here is, first main thing here, also jumping back to that 80-20 rule, is having the reference track in your file. So I have David Penn and Ophia's song Satisfied here in the project file, and I've set it so it's turned off, and I mapped the S key on my keyboard so that I could flick back and forth between what I'm listening to and building and the reference track, just like this. Just like that. And so when it comes to building out the kick, what I did is, like normal, I found a little spot here. Like you can see, I made this little cut in the reference track where the kick was kind of playing by itself. Then what I did was I dragged it onto this little rack I made called the R kick, which is short for reference kick. To drag it onto here, and you have like the quick macros to be able to quickly kind of isolate the kick drum so no other sounds are playing, and you have a kick drum that you can use. However, what I did to take things to the next level is then what I did was I flattened and froze it. So right click, flatten, and then right click again, and then press freeze. And that creates something like this over here. So then we have that reference kick playing here, and I was able to then cut it. And then this is where things get a little interesting and different, I think. So I then grabbed this sample and I dropped it into this program here called Synonym. You can see here I'm trying it out as a 30-day trial. There's a couple different types of these sample plugin library manager things that have some kind of machine learning or AI where if you drop a sample into it, it can then reference all the other samples that you have on your computer to find something similar. So the idea is I drop that kick into here, which sounded like that, a little bit different. And then you can, I think, click this button here, and it'll show you a whole bunch of different samples that you have that sound similar or different degrees of similarity. Then what I did was I dragged that into the drum rack that I have here, a couple of different sounds, and then kind of jumped between them using the selector that I have here, so I can change them and flick for the reference, back and forth. And I ended up on this one here, which is a sample from Rocket Powered Sounds, which we'll talk about later. And so this is a cool way, I think. I want to keep playing with this. I'm going to refine this in future videos, but I like it because what we can do is we can extract the kick from a reference that sounds really good, then drop it into a program that's going to use AI or machine learning to find similar samples from our library that haven't been stolen from a song for one, and are like the perfectly isolated kick drum ready to go in your project. So that's how I ended up finding the sound for the kick drum. The next point is, well, first thing is the pattern, really. It was just classic 4 on the floor, so if you have a look at this. Very simple. Main thing is just flicking back toward the reference track to listen for the notes. Boom. Then the second thing was that whole song and dance, building a drum rack of similar samples after extracting the kick, and then just trying to get the right sound. Flicking back and forth. And then onto the processing, which isn't too much usually. So what I'm running this into here is I have an EQ8, but I just have it, if you can see the red dot here, it's an automation, so at certain points it just gets rid of the lows. It's more of an arrangement, micro transition kind of trick. Then I am running it into some drum buffs, which I've been experimenting with a little bit more on the kicks, because what we can do is set it to a certain frequency, which can be in the key of the song. Doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same like key of the song, because then you can actually get kind of clashing of frequencies. So just adding a little bit of boominess here. If we turn it off, it's very subtle, I would say. And that's really it. Main thing is finding the right notes, picking the right sounds, and flicking back and forth between this and the reference track so you get the right volumes. The volumes is really the biggest thing. I mentioned it a lot here, but volumes is super important. Flicking it kind of on time like that. Cool. So the next thing that I brought in was this snare, so let's have a listen to that and a look at the pattern. And so flicking back and forth between this and the reference, it's just a classic, like it's on the 2 and the 4 and the 2 and the 4 in terms of the pattern. In terms of the sound design, I did try to do something similar with Sononym where I extracted out I can't find it, but whatever. I extracted out a spot in the reference track where the snare was more or less isolated, dropped it into Sononym, found a bunch of different snare sounds. We can have a look here, and built out just for 3 or 4 using that similar sound feature. Found a bunch of different ones again from Rocket Powered Sound, and then landed on this snare here using the selector to kind of pick the right sounds is the main thing. So let's listen back and forth. And I kind of like this one most here. So also when listening for the snare, there's usually a snare and a clap layered, so you're kind of listen more to the middle of the sound in terms of the stereo spectrum to hear the snare, I would say. Usually the claps are panned left and right, a little bit more stereo. So that's a look at that. Main thing was getting the sound selection right, then running it into my standard channel strip, but in this case, just removing a bunch of the lows here, and that's really it. And then again, trying to get the volumes right. Next thing I added in was a clap, so let's take a look and a listen to that. You can hear there, it's really the clap, I feel like, that's really driving the track here. The snare is just kind of filling it in the middle. So what I have is 2 different sounds that I found from, again, Rocket Powered Sounds here in this case. I have one panned a little bit, pushed a little bit to the left. Not always the same, it's a little bit different, looking for some kind of humanization here. And then the other one, I have another clap there that's pushed, I think it's more or less just dead center. So I just have one that's kind of moving a little bit off the grid. Then what I'm doing here is I'm panning it a little bit left. No, I'm not. They're just layered over top of each other. Cool. So yeah, just found 2 cool clap sounds. Flick back and forth. Just like that, is like trying to flick back and forth between the reference and your track almost in time, so that like your snare or clap is going in place of where it would be in the reference track, so you can kind of listen to it really, really close like that. But other than that, running it into the standard channel strip, I probably should mention again, all these things like these channel strips, these little one knob knobs things, all these kind of things in this entire project file is available in the link in the description as well. But this is the standard channel strip that I usually run each track through and have it set as a default for both MIDI clips and audio clips. So that right away, removing a bunch of the lows, so that's mainly being taken care of by the kick and the bass, and kind of makes things a little bit less muddy. Then I'm running into a transient designer, which is a free one, kilohertz, I want to say, transient shaper. And I've just mapped the main knobs to an Ableton rack. That way I don't need to open up the plugin each time, and I can quickly get to what I need to get to and kind of use your ears a bit more too, which is another nice benefit. Just bringing down the sustain a little bit to kind of tighten up the sound of the clap a little bit. Not doing any sidechain or saturation. I'm using this again, one knob with plugin, which is another free one. And again, I've just mapped the crucial knobs here, so I can just quickly grab this, add some width, pushing the claps a bit more to the left and right, and kind of giving that stereo full sound. So next up, I added in an open hi-hat, so let's take a look and a listen to that. And so what we got going on here is the classic kind of position for an open hi-hat. So it's like the off beat in between each one of these beats. I have 2 claps being layered here, and the only difference is there's a little bit of change in volume or velocity. So the first hit's a little harder, the second one's a little softer, just trying to add some kind of humanization. Went for 2 different hi-hat sounds. Let's see if we're doing anything in terms of like panning. So I have one that's panned a bit to the right in the simpler device here, and then one that's probably panned similar to the left. So it's kind of giving it a stereo sound. I feel like in this kind of like disco housey kind of vibe, it's pretty common to have this kind of like badass open. Hopefully that didn't, microphone just fell, sorry about that. But yeah, kind of going for this like super fat, like it's taking up quite a bit of the sound, I would say. So let's flick back and forth between this open hat and the reference track. Kind of take a listen to the sound selection as well as the volume is what we're going for here. So let's have a listen. So not exactly the same, but quite similar, I would say. And it has like more of a fullness to it is how I would describe it. So other than that, the next thing is looking at some of the processing. So I'm running it into a bit of an overdrive here, trying to add quite a bit of volumes happening there. Whenever anybody on YouTube, including me, does stuff like this, if it's like, oh, look at this plugin, if it's mostly adding volume, like remember to keep that in mind. It's like, oh, well, that sounds better. Like loudness just sounds better to the human ear. So in this case, it's not volume matched. So pay a little bit more attention to like kind of the distortion fullness that it's kind of adding as opposed to just the volume. You can see it sounds like fuller, a bit like crispier and distorted, as well as a volume increase. But probably the main thing you're hearing is a volume increase. So keep that in mind in this instance, and whenever you come across it, to be honest too. Next thing is running it into the standard channel strip. So removing a whole bunch of the lows here, using the transient shaper to add a bit more attack so that the transient's a bit punchier and in your face a bit more, and tightening up the sustain a whole ton so that the open hi-hat sounds way less floppy like that, I guess, and it's a lot tighter. Then we're running it into a 1-knob sidechain. It's just Ableton Saturator, just mapped here so that it's easy to get to, and that's about it. Main thing again is volumes. We'll move on to the next, which is going to be the closed hi-hats, which is adding a lot of the groove, and well, let me just turn it on and let's have a look and listen. Subtle, so I'm also going to increase the volume for a bit so we can pay attention to the closed hat. And I'll even solo it for a second. Okay. And let me bring it back to how it's been mixed in. So with this, I feel like there wasn't a lot of energy going on with the closed hats. It's pretty subtle in my opinion. So let me show you how I built this out. So first thing I usually do with closed hats is I'll start with one of these notes here that I've highlighted, and this is kind of just mimicking the open hi-hat position. It's adding some fullness to that open hi-hat sound, and also making it so that as terms of an arrangement, you can have it so that you remove the open hi-hats at points, and when you remove the open hi-hat, the closed hi-hat is still filling in that gap as well, so it's also useful for arrangement. Other than that, main thing is kind of, okay. First thing is there's 2 bars here. Usually what I'll do is then I'll focus on 1 bar and then add in a couple extra notes using different hi-hat sounds to kind of give it a human sound and a bit more interesting as well. And the idea is to just kind of play around with the position of the notes. You can flick back and forth to the reference track as well to try to hear these things. And then the idea after that is to duplicate it over and then make some changes to this pattern so that there's like a call and a response, basically, is the idea. So it looks a little bit more complicated than it is. I also am doing, I think if we go like this, I'm doing a little bit of that cool velocity randomization. So each hit is a little bit different each time, which adds some cool humanization and groove to the track. Other than that, running into the processing, basically nothing. Absolutely nothing else going on here. Main thing is getting the volumes down. So once the core sounds, hi-hat, open hat, claps, snares, kick are done, using all like nice proper samples so it sounds nice and full. It's really taking care of the core of the drum sound. Then I usually like to add in all these like kind of top loops and breaks and stuff like that to add some interest to the drum loop and make it sound a little bit fuller and cooler. So let's go in order of how I built that out. So the first one I added was this Shake It one. Let's have a listen to it. And let's listen to it soloed. So if we listen to the reference, I don't think, maybe there's some kind of like bongo-y stuff, but I was feeling the vibe. Also, I should mention, my recommendation is when you're building out tracks, particularly against a reference, just start by copying it quite closely, but then start taking liberties as you build out your track so that you can actually make it something original that you could probably release later is the idea, and that's my approach with this as well. So in terms of the processing, a good thing to do sometimes with the loops is in beats mode, switch it to make sure it's on transients and switch it to this one where the arrow is pointing to the right, and you can tighten up the transients, and I find this could help it blend into your core sounds a little bit more. Other than that, a little bit of processing going on with the standard channel strip. So removing some of the lows, boosting up some of the lows as well by notching it up a bit. I guess I just wanted to sound a little bit fuller, and then shelving out some of the highs instead of low passing it. So that high passing it, low passing it. I always get that confused. So this is a more natural way to remove some of the highs and kind of blend it into the rest of the drums. Then we're running it into the 1-knob sidechain. Haven't talked about this yet, but this is just a Ableton Shaper running to quarter notes. Quarter notes is the note length or duration of the kick drum. So that way you don't actually have to map it to the kick drum. You can just set it to quarter notes, have it ducking against volume, and you get a similar effect, and you only have to just dial it in with one knob, and you can do it to ear and to taste instead of getting too technical and using your eyes, I guess you could say. So this is just pumping the sound a little bit, giving it some groove, and taking away the sound so that there's room for the kick and the bass to shine through. Then we're running into a bit of this 1-knob width plugin, kind of making it stereo, pushing it to the left and the right a little bit. Then let's move on to the next top loop. It can be similar moves from here on out, so I'll try to go a little bit faster, but this is the next one that we're listening to. Let me solo it. So it's subtle. And it's again a bit more of a congo-y, bongo-y kind of cool sound. So in this instance, nothing going on with the transients. Similar moves with the channel strips. So we're removing a bunch of the lows, shelving up some of the highs. In this one, we're removing some of the sustain to tighten up the sound here, which is a similar move as kind of this, tightening things up in the clip view. Okay, well, no, sorry, in the clip view here, like this, pulling that back. So it's very similar. It's a very similar move, but we're using it with the transient shaper instead, tightening up the sustain, making the sound more tight. A little bit of 1-knob sidechain, so it's pumping and grooving, making room for the kick, and then a little bit of 1-knob saturation. Saturation usually is being used to fill out the sound a bit, add some more like harmonics, and also can add some kind of grit and like vibe to tracks as well. Next up, also that's panned a bit to the right. Then we have this next one that's panned a bit to the left, so let's have a look and a listen to this one. Solo it for a second. So another cool kind of congo-y, bongo-y thing. If we have a look here, again, we're pulling back the transients a bit to tighten it up. There's actually something cool that I want to show you. I might have did this on some other tracks, but I don't want to double back. But I switched it to clip and set it to gain, and then brought down the gain in this track so that I'm kind of controlling the sounds that are coming through in the top loop a little bit. I didn't want whatever this was coming through as much. It might have been kind of like tonal, or I just didn't like it. This is something you can do too to kind of, again, customize your drum loop, your top loops a little bit more, make them a little bit more unique as you're blending them into your drums. Then we're running it into this channel strip, removing some of the lows, shelving out some of the highs, ducking out some of the sustains to tighten it up a bit, a little bit of 1-knob sidechain, and away we go. The next thing is this cowbell. I don't know if I'm actually... I wasn't using that, so let's remove that. This next one, actually I gotta move it to over here, because in the reference track, if we listen to that cowbell. I just found a loop to kind of emulate that, and let's have a listen to what that sounds like over here. Definitely not the same. Definitely different. Just found a cool loop on Splice. You can see here, one thing I did do is the starting point is actually here, and I just kind of shifted it over. I just like the pattern that sounds a little bit different. So that's another thing you can do to make loops a little bit more your own. You can change the starting point of them. So I found something cool in Splice, and then running it into a bit of overdrive saturation. It sounds kind of distorted, I would say, or something sounds just more interesting to the sound in the reference. So added in some overdrive here. Also ran it into a shifter where it's being dropped an octave, and I just dialed it in a little bit, so it's adding some like body and uniqueness to the sound, I would say. And then standard channel strip stuff, removing some of the lows, shelving up some of the highs, one knob side chain, a little bit of saturation to fill up things out. And then I'm also using that width plugin to make it mono, just with one knob here. And that's that one. And then we have another loop here, which is the last one. Just a cool other loop that I found on Splice. And let's have a quick look at the processing here. So removing a bunch of the lows, a little bit of one up side chain, a little bit of saturation. And that's a look at the drums. All right. So let's dive into the bass here. So the very first thing, right off the bat, first key here is the song David Penn of Faya's song Satisfied is in here as a reference track, and I've set it up so that it's turned off, but when I press the S key on my keyboard, I can flick back and forth to try to get things to sound similar. And so for this one, it's like with this disco bass sound, it's definitely kind of mostly a sub bass with maybe a bit of a sound of like a bass guitar, I would say, but it sounds like it's mostly, I would say, sub bass. So first thing is the notes. So let's have a look at the notes and a listen to that. So the idea is to flick back and forth. And kind of try to get a similar vibe, but not fully ripping it off. The idea that I usually go for here is to try to catch the vibe, but not rip it off, so that way you can actually build it out into something, your own track, as opposed to just having a perfect remake. So this is kind of the vibe. It's kind of like a cool little stuttery repeating sound, I would say. Just look at the notes. I'm not crazy with music theory, so just have a look at them, I guess. And if you want the project files in the description. The next, let's move on to the next phase, which is the sound design. So when it comes to the sound design, I always like to have two layers with my bass, a sub layer and a bass guitar layer. And the first one I usually like to do is this sub layer. So this is what the sub sounds by itself. So you can hear it's carrying most of the weight of the track and even most of like the sound of the bass as well. And so what's cool about using a sub like this is it's similar to using like a basic guitar or a basic piano. You can start like this without focusing on the sound design and really make sure that you get the right notes. In addition to that, when you're mixing, then you have one track that takes care of all the low end, and then you can have another track that's taking care of more of the character and the vibe. So keeping things on the sub for now, before we get to that character and vibe, I'm running into a little thing that I made here called the V sub, and it's basically just operator doing a basic sine wave with the option to add in different levels of saturation, which can fill out the sound a bit, make it so you could hear it on laptop speakers a little bit more, and also can add some vibe and character to your sub bass. Other than that, the main thing I want to call out here is I have a one knob sidechain here, so that way it's just using an Ableton shaper instead of having to map it to the kick and all that kind of stuff. Just with one knob, you can get that cool sidechain pumping effect and make room for the kick as well. So that's a look at the subs. Then let's add on the bass guitar layer. So it's subtle, and what it's doing is adding in a bit of like mid-range character and vibe to the track. And like by itself, it probably sounds terrible. Actually pretty cool. But so the idea here is, first off, in terms of the notes, you'll notice that there's no notes here. And what I'm doing here is, instead of having this over here set to all ends, I've set it to subs, which means the MIDI from subs is going to be automatically routed into this channel. This way, as you're building out the track, if you kind of change things up on the MIDI here, you don't have to copy and paste things over a million times. It's just going to automatically route in. A big key point here, though, is when working with multiple layers like this with your bass, One thing I like to have always is a pitch device. So that way, in this case, I had to move it up an octave from what sounded good on the sub. Sometimes you might need to move it up 2 octaves, sometimes down. And this way, you can still route it into your mid-bass layer and adjust the pitch all from here. Then I'm running it into this little device that I made. It's a bass guitar sound from a plugin, but I didn't want to like load the plugin every time. So just kind of added into an Ableton sampler device. It's kind of a bass guitar sound. I am adjusting the sustain a little bit so the sound's a little bit tighter, trying to kind of make it a little bit more cohesive with the sub sound. And then a lot of EQ here, just getting rid of all the lows because you want the sub to be taking care of that department. And then I'm rolling off a ton of the highs too to get to kind of keep it blended in and mostly kind of trying to keep it more of a, or less a subby sound, I would say. Then the next thing is running into this transient shaper. It's just a free kilohertz transient shaper, and I've mapped all the main knobs here, pulling back the sustain so it's tightening up the sound a bit. Then running it into this one knob width plugin. It's a plugin called Wider, and that's free as well. Again, just map the main knobs here so that way I can just quickly adjust the width. Trying to make it so the mid bass is a little bit more stereo, so it's filling up the sound a little bit, and leaving the center free for the sub to take care of. And then we're running into a one knob sidechain, which is similar to what's built into that D sub. This is kind of what it looks like. It's a shaper device going to quarter notes and just ducking out volume instead of having to play with compressors and do all that kind of stuff. And just with one knob you get it done. And then a little bit of saturation to fill out the sound a little bit. I'm just using Ableton Saturator here. And that is pretty much it. I do want to show you in this particular tune, I took like a left turn on it. So if we listen to it's more or less just that. And then I built it out so that eventually like a chord progression happens. So I'm just going to show you the back half of this remake. Show you the notes. So again, we listen back to the... Feels like there's some kind of progression happening in the original track as well. And that's more of an arrangement idea, but the idea is back half of the song has more of a chord progression going on, first half of the song has more just standard notes. And then I'm running into a little bit of group processing here that I could show you. This is all off. I'm running into a K-clip to kind of take control of the levels a little bit, aiming for about a decibel of reduction there. And then running into this bass punch in parallel, a bit of parallel compression here, a little bit of saturation, and the K-clip again. I'll go over a mixing video in this one, and we'll go into that in more detail. For sure. Kind of cool spot here. Okay, and I think in terms of the bass, that's a pretty good wraparound, I would say. Let's go into an 80-20 rule recap. I want to make sure you have a good understanding of all the key ideas of like 80-20 rule mixing here, really locked in. All right. So when it comes to kind of the synths and vocals for the disco house sound, I'd say the kind of thing I was going for here was it's usually remaking some kind of classic disco house track. You're going to want to find something that has a cool groove to it, like the instrumental is kind of cool, and the vocal is pretty freaking important. So those are kind of going to be the main focuses here. When recreating this track, I definitely took it into a bit more of I feel like it's not as energetic and it's not as like upbeat. It's a little bit more sadder, kind of has that like classic filter house like Fred Falk and those guys is kind of what mine went into. But with that said, let's kind of go through things in order of how I built things out. And again, one of the main things right off the bat, a little key there for the 80-20 rule, is having the reference track in the file, as you can see here, and having it mapped so that the S key, when I press it, goes back and forth to help set the right volumes and the levels and all that, because that's really going to get you, that's the fast track there. So with that said, let's focus on this melodic group that I built out. The first thing that I added was this, and we're going to go in order as I added things so you can get an idea of how to do this yourself too, which was this. So I think the idea that I was coming from here was I just wanted some extra noise and some kind of something interesting going on to add to the drums and the bass. And so I just found some kind of little sample. Tried to find a little spot in the sample like of noise here where there's like a vocal kind of almost coming through or talking. I feel like the original track has some cool little like vibey stuff like that. So just found this kind of this thing. I think it was from Project Freesound. I threw on an RC20 to add some vinyl crackle and that kind of stuff. Then ran it into the standard channel strip, removing a bunch of the lows, shelving out some of the highs. A bit of one knob sidechain to kind of pump it, make sure it's making room for the kick. And that's about it for this one. Moving on to the next bit, I think I went straight into vocals, which seemed pretty important. So first there's this one. So fucking cool. So for this, what I did was I found a cool sample on Splice. Kind of looking for like diva vocals, soulful vocals, those kind of things. And as you can see, I just kind of cut it up a little bit. So it's kind of doing that repeating pattern, and at near the end of it, it kind of doubles up and makes things a little different. It is to kind of cut it up a bit. You can see it's like keep it on the low, keep it on the low, keep it on the low. So cutting up the sample is pretty important to make sure it's a bit more unique and it's not super repetitive. Other than that, main things going on here is a little bit more EQ than I normally do. So we're removing a bunch of the lows and then also shelved up a bunch of the highs. Just felt like it wasn't cutting through as much. Big part of the sound here for this is this auto filter. And so if we have a look, there we go. I've automated the frequency so that it's slowly moving up over time. And I just did this like in the project file here. So it's constantly changing and evolving, keeps things interesting. And then also I adjusted the resonance because sometimes as it's getting higher in frequency, it can get a little distorted and crappy sounding. After that, running it into some Tantra, just adding some weird like little lo-fi sounds. If I put it up all the way, can you hear that? It actually sounds really freaking cool. So I feel like in the arrangement, it could be cool to just have that at full blast, but I just dialed it back a bunch so that it's a bit more subtle. Then we're running into what do we have here? Some one knob sidechain. So again, this is just an Ableton shaper on the quarter notes mapped to the gain so that you don't have to like compress or attach a bunch of things and all that. It's just one knob, super easy. And then also a bit of one knob Ableton saturation to fill out this sound a little bit. Then we're running into this one knob width plugin, which is making the sound a little bit more stereo because it's not the main vocal of this track. And this is just this free wider plugin. I've just mapped the key features to an Ableton rack. So it's just, you can use your eyes, you can use your ears more than your eyes, and it's just so much faster. All this stuff is available in the project files if you want to check out the link in the description. Then what we're running into is this effect rack using the Pan Man. And this is just kind of moving this vocal in the stereo field a bunch. And then lastly, running into K-Clip to increase the volume a bit. It was just too quiet basically. And that's a look at that one. So next, let's have a look and a listen to the main vocal right now. So I'm gonna just turn it off. Keep that in mind, because yeah, when there's two vocals talking over each other, it could sound like all messed up. But basically, it's the same vocal, just not like high passed or anything, or not like low passed. So just coming in full. It's meant to be the main vocal. So this one, just removing some lows, a bit of one knob sidechain, a bit of saturation to fill it out, and that's basically it. Other than that, there's like, I'm gonna show you this part here. It's a bit more of an arrangement bit, but you can see here like at different points in the song. This is what it sounds like full. And if I jump over here, just kind of cutting it up, a little tease like that, I think is really cool. Something like that's pretty neat. And then if we jump back to the main area here, one thing is now that we have these vocals in, flicking back and forth between this and the reference, trying to get the volumes right is kind of the main thing. I think ours is similar, not perfect, but definitely similar. So I can turn that off for now and move on to the last couple tracks here. So next thing that we have is this. I'm gonna solo it for a second. So So just some cool thing I found on Splice. Kind of subtle, plays against the other vocal parts that are in there. It's just mostly just dropped right in there. At certain points in the arrangement, it's kind of like cut up and teased a little bit, like you can see here. But for the most part, it's just playing. It is what it is. What we got is a little bit of compression. Just trying to tidy up the signal a bit because it was kind of fluctuating. Lots of like high peaks and low lows. I wanted the signal to be a bit more same volume throughout the duration of the phrase. So just a little bit of compression there. I did fast attack, automatic release, and about 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction. Then we're running into the standard channel strip that I usually do. So removing a bunch of the lows, making room for the kick and the bass, and then removing a bunch of the highs to kind of mix the sound in with the rest of the tune. Then we're going into this one-up transient designer, which is a transient shaper, which is the 3 kilohertz transient shaper. Again, similar to the width plugin, just mapped the main features here so I could just quickly bring down the sustain to tighten up the sound a little bit. Then we're going to some one-up sidechain for some pumping and making room for the kick and the bass, as well as some saturation here using Ableton Saturator to fill up the sound a little bit. And then I want some width so that it's a little bit more stereo, and pushing it to the left and right so that that main vocal is the thing that's in the center for the most part. Then the last big key here is if you're doing this like how I think David Penn and Ofaya worked on this track, my assumption is that what they did was they found a cool disco song from like, you know, the past, and maybe used like something like AI to split up the vocal from the rest of the instrumentals so that they have 2 tracks to work with, and then just built the song around that. So to kind of do that kind of vibe, the vocals aren't from something that anything I know, but what I did was I just found like a full sample of something to include to kind of get a similar effect. So let me stop rambling and let me show you and listen to what that sounds like together. Solo it for a second. So nice. So something like that, super easy to work with because it doesn't have drums already, and you can use like La La and stuff like that, AI plugins to remove the drums from anything you're working on, or find a cool sample like this and throw it in. Main thing is this sample is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. It's a really cool sample, and I just made some slight changes to make it so that it's not just totally just dropping a sample in there. So those small changes were as such. So removing a bunch of the lows, mostly of a mixing tick to make sure that the bass and the kick are not interrupted, letting the low end do its thing. Main thing really is this filter where over the course of the track, it's more high passed and it's kind of more swelling down like that, and then it makes it sound like it's evolving and coming in and out throughout the track, which I think is super cool. Other than that, a bit of one-knob sidechain to make it give it that pumping effect, and then a bit of width to push it to the left and right. So for the most part, it's really just the sample doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And then one of the last things that I did add in was this, which I think is just noise. Listen to this. Water sounds. I just wanted to, I guess. It makes it sound a little bit more interesting, I guess, if you're really paying attention. But really, that's some subtle stuff that maybe is just something I like to do, and you don't definitely have to do that. Yeah, with that said, let's hear it all together. Yeah, so it's really just stitching a bunch of cool ideas together, thinking about call and response, making sure everything has its own space in terms of like frequencies and time. And with that said, well, before we jump into the 80-20 rule, I want to do like a nice recap of this so that you don't miss anything, and you could start applying these kind of moves to make songs faster and faster yourself. All right. So let's jump into the mix and the master for this track. So one of the first things off the top I want to mention is it's important to have a reference track for the song you want to build up against. In your project file, what I like to do is turn it off like this and map it so that the S key, I can quickly flick between what we're working on and what the reference track is. This way you can do the main key here when it comes to the 80-20 rule, mixing, mastering, stuff like this. is flicking back and forth so you can set the volumes right. Focusing on the volumes is going to be the fastest, quickest way that you can make things sound really professional, because you're comparing your volumes against a really, really high quality track, ideally. So with that said, the kind of process that I want to kind of go over is what I usually do first is as I'm building up the track, I'm mixing as I go. And so there's a particular way that I do this that I want to highlight. And if you watch the other videos in this series and other videos on the channel, then you have an idea of what this is. But the main idea here is really about setting up kind of channel strips that I want to show you. So usually what I have is this channel strip here, and every track that I add, audio track, MIDI track, usually has this channel strip. And so the idea is for each track, as you're introducing a new element, what you want to do is quickly adjust the EQ. And the main EQ adjustment you want to do is removing the low end, because this can be a quick way to make sure that the low end is saved and preserved, so that the kick and the bass is the main element that's taking up the low end. So a quick thing you could do is I set up this channel strip so that it's automatically set to be cutting out 200 hertz. So almost always right away, whenever I add a new track, it's already has this cut, and I can just come in here and adjust it if it's needed to be adjusted. The next thing I like to do is sometimes do a high shelf, and this can be a nice way to help mix the song in, so it's maybe the highs aren't cutting through as much, and you can mix the element into your track a bit more. Then I might do some transient shaping. So what this is here is the Free Killers Transient Shaper. What I've just done is set it up in a drum rack so that I can quickly adjust the attack and sustain. So what this is the transients of the sound. So something that I'll normally do is pull back the sustain, which will tighten up the sound a bit. And when your sounds are a bit tighter, it's going to sound a little bit more cohesive and professional, in my opinion. So playing with that's important. Then the next thing I'll usually do is run things into this little rack I made, where it's a 1-knob sidechain and a 1-knob saturation. The sidechain is right here. It's just a shaper in a LFO tool looking shape, running to a quarter note, which is what the kick is usually playing, and it's just ducking volume on the utility. And that way you can just quickly with one knob add in some simple sidechain, dialing it in mostly by ear, which I think is important. Same thing with the saturation. This is just Ableton Saturator right here. And the idea is you can introduce saturation to fill out the sound a little bit as you're working with the track. So instead of always moving towards the volume, you can also create some body and some texture and some fullness by adding in saturation. And then the last thing usually in this chain here is this width plugin, which is a free plugin as well, Polyverse Wider. I've just mapped everything to some Ableton rack knobs so that it's just like with one knob, can push things to the left and right, make it more stereo, which is important. And also, again, making sure that, say, things like vocals or any main lead lines and some drum sounds like the kick are in the center, and when you push things left and right, it's making so the stuff in the center is less, it's not competing with as much because you're moving things within the panorama. So these are some small changes that I'll usually do very quickly as I'm building each track. So I can just quickly go through this. With the kick, something that I usually do is just don't even add any kind of low cut. There's something I heard about how there could be like phasing issues and stuff like that, and it also just makes it easier for me. Just like the kick drops in, I'm not playing with that low end anymore. I just choose the right sample, set the right volume, and don't tweak too many crazy things. And that's really the main idea. So as you introduce a track, compare it back and forth. Say we're listening to the kick. Listen to the kick, how yours sounds compared to it. Pick the right sound, set the right level, and that's really going to be the main thing. Then as you're going through it, you can do small tweaks like just getting rid of some of the low end, tightening things up with some transient shaping, making sure there's some kind of one knob side chain, or however you want to do the side chain, so there's some pumping, that cool dance effect. And it's making room for the kick and the bass, some saturation to fill out the sound optionally, and some width if you want to adjust the width. But again, the main thing is selecting the right sounds and selecting the right volumes. So if you want to have a more of a deep dive into how I was building each one of these tracks, let's add some more volume, some interest here. Definitely check out the other videos in the series. I go over each of the drums one by one, each of the bass one by one, each of the melodic stuff by one. And you can kind of see that mix as you go process. The only other thing I think I want to go over in this video would be maybe mixing the bass. So when it comes to the bass, one thing that I like to do is have two tracks. One is for the subs and one is for the bass. There's a couple of reasons. One is when you're writing tracks, when it's just a sub, it's similar to writing to, if you're using a piano or like a guitar, you're focusing on a very, very, very neutral tone, not a lot of sound design going on, so you can focus on getting the notes right. In addition to that, when you have two tracks like this, you can make sure that the sub is the element that's taking care of the low end. So if you ever feel like the song isn't sounding full enough, you can just adjust this track, increase the volume without screwing up any of the tone of the bass or anything like that. Similarly, by having like, so the mid bass sound, so in this case, and usually what I like is this cool like bass guitar sound. But that way, this second bass track its focus is on the character and the vibe and like the grit of the tune, and you can make adjustments to this mid bass layer, but just cut out a bunch of the lows as you can see here, and then you're just focusing on the character of it. And like, say if you do some sound design trick and then it destroys your low end, that's not a problem because another track is taking care of that low end. So that's another one I mentioned there. If you want to learn more about this, definitely check out the bass video for this track. And then other than that, same thing, going through, adding each track, setting the volumes, comparing it to the reference track, and doing small changes to the channel strip stuff. Very, very, very small changes. No like crazy EQ cuts or anything too insane like that. Last thing I want to go over, mixing. Once I've done the mix as you go, build out the process like this. Sometimes what I will do next is do some group or bus processing. So if we start over with the drums, on the group here, what we have is I'm running into a K clip right off the top, and this is mainly going for about a decibel of clip, and it's also trying to control the volume. So I have the in and the out linked so that when I could pull this back so it's not going too crazy. Because when I'm mixing, what I usually do is, you can see here the reference track is set to 0. So I'm actually mixing everything to 0 instead of like ducking everything down 6 decibels and then trying to bring it back up in mastering. Kind of how I've been doing it, and I've been pretty happy with the results, and it's just simple and it just works. But then you do need to make sure that you have some contingency, and I think a good way to do that is with clipping, to make sure that things aren't going above 0 and getting all distorted and sounding like crap. So that's an important thing. Then other than that, it's just a little bit of some bus processing here. So running into this punch and parallel preset. This is a technique called New York compression or parallel compression. And the idea is, you can see here, this is slamming. So we have like 5 to 10 decibels of gain reduction with some pretty intense settings. And the idea is, the main thing is it's just being dialed in a bit. So it's adding some fullness to the sound in a subtle way, because we're just dialing in the dry and wet knob here. Then similar idea, we're going into a saturator and pulling back the dry and wet knob, so it's adding in a bit of saturation. And the idea is, by running through all the drums through a similar compressor and saturator, it's going to kind of tighten up the sound a bit and add some kind of cohesion, because everything's having the same processing being applied to it, which is super cool. And then lastly, going through another K clip here, going for less than a decibel clipped. We're already doing quite a bit there. Just trying to control the volume, make sure it doesn't go above 0 after all the processing we did. Next up is the processing on the bass. So these are all off, so we'll just scoot over to what's on. Very similar moves. As you can see here, what we're doing is starting off by going into a K clip, going for under a decibel clipped here with the linked function, so that as I was setting the volumes for the bass, this is going to make sure, even though I'm bringing it down 3.5 decibels, it's automatically bringing up 3.5 decibels. So all those volume changes of mixing against the reference track are going to be preserved, and you're not going to be adding in too much volume or taking away too much volume as you do additional mixing steps like this. I'm going to adjust the microphone. Hopefully that wasn't too quiet for that whole stretch of time. But with that said, then what we're running into here is this bass punch again thing. So we're doing some New York style compression, dialing it in with the dry and wet. Same thing with the saturation. We're dialing that in, just a bit of taste, getting everything to run through the same thing, adding that cohesion, kind of controlling the dynamics of the tracks a bit as well. And then our last K clip, just to make sure that we're not going above 0, and we're just kind of clipping some of the signal, which is going to help in the mastering stage, because we're not doing too much limiting or clipping. It's all about small changes over time, making sure each plugin isn't doing too much heavy lifting. Then last but not least, same stuff going on the melodic elements. A little bit of a different bit of processing going here. We're doing that New York style parallel compression, also running it into some OTT, OTT can really bring out kind of some like energy and like high end and make everything sound a bit more present, but it's also important to dial it in at a smaller level, so just about 10% here. And also the high's been controlled a little bit because OTT could add quite a bit of too much high end, I would say. And then similar thing, saturation, we're running everything through the same saturator, and then into a K clip, looking for about a decibel or so of gain reduction on all that. And then all the effects are running into just a K clip, so I could bring it up and get a bit of clipping on that as well. So that way everything is being clipped a little bit, so that when we go into the final mastering stage, which is right here, all the mastering is simple. It's not going to be each plugin is not going to be working as hard, which is really important. So let's do a quick run through of the mastering. I'm using a MacBook Air, so this might get a little hairy, so I'm going to try to turn everything on in a sequence, and I might have to turn some stuff off if it's starting to destroy the computer. But generally the first thing I do is, so let's turn this on. You'll notice right away there was a decrease in the volume. One of the big things here is this compressor. So one of the first things is to run the mastering, in my opinion, of course with all this I guess, is to run it into a bit of compression, just lightly going for about like almost a decibel of compression, just to like lightly control the signal a little bit, make things a little bit more smoother, and what we're looking for is really just a very small amount of compression being applied here, so about a decibel. Since I mix to like 0 all the time, I find that if I didn't have this utility on at the beginning, it'd be like 2 or 3 decibels of compression, which I feel is a bit too much. And this is with the threshold at 0, so there's nowhere for me to go here. So what I like to do is just have a utility on here, so I can use this utility to bring down the volume so I'm getting the right amount of gain reduction. In addition to that, on this compressor, we are setting it up so that it's not, it's skipping basically the kick drum. So we have this like little like low pass. It's not low passing the signal, it's just adjusting how the compressor is reacting. So by bringing this up, the kick is impacting the compressor a little bit less, and that way we're not getting as much kind of like weird, crappy pumping sounds basically. Next thing that I usually do is I add in this Golf Bus Master. So this is like kind of an AI EQ plugin. Very subtle settings, around 11 to 15% for recover. Same thing for the tame. Usually dropping down the brighten a bit and then bringing back this kind of low pass. So that way, this can add a bit of like too much high end, I find. But again, this is a really subtle plugin, I would say. If I turn it off and on, it's very subtle what it's doing, but I find it can help kind of fix any mistakes that you might have made in the mixing process and just kind of make things a little bit more stable. Then we're going to get into the final bit of like loudness. So this is a technique I learned from my buddy Zach Adams. So first thing is running into the first limiter. What we're looking for is about a decibel of gain reduction here, with true peak limiting off, and the transparent, set it on the transparent style. And then as well as on the output going -1 decibel. So the idea is small moves, each plugin's not working too crazy, so we're getting about a decibel of gain reduction, and we're hovering around a -11 LUFS. We're looking at the short-term LUFS is what we want to look at here. So let's move on to the next step, which is running it into a K clip. So again, we're looking for about a decibel clipped, and we'll also have the ceiling set to -1, so it's bringing everything down by 1. And this is going to cut off some of the transients off the top, which is going to give us a bit of headroom here. And then into the last limiter, where we're once again looking for about a decibel of gain reduction. This time, it's good to switch between modern or aggressive in terms of the limiting style, with true peak on this one, and the output at about -2, 0.2 or 0.3. And so by adding this all together, we're looking at about -8.5 LUFS, which is pretty good. I'm usually looking for between -7, -8, -9 is usually pretty good. It could get pushed more, but this is a nice way where things aren't too crispy and sounding too crappy. And also, cool, the MacBook Air is holding off nicely. Let me just turn on the last bit of vocal too and show you some of how that processing is reacting, because we do have this off. And let's have a look. Boom. So that's a look at the mixing and mastering. I'm glad my computer is not exploding, but hopefully it didn't bring the volume up too much or anything. Yeah, that's a look at that. One thing I want to mention before we jump into the 80/20 rule here is this video is sponsored by our good friends over at Rocket Powered Sounds. The kick, snare, and clap samples that you heard in this project file is actually from their Ultimate Sample Pack, which is a massive sample pack filled with over 1,000 usable and iconic sounds. And as a special bonus, you can get 30% off of that Ultimate Sample Pack. Just visit the link on screen now or in the description, and be sure to use the coupon code ULTIMATEBESTFRIENDS to get 30% off. Thank you again to Rocket Powered Sounds for hooking up our community here. And let's jump back into the 80/20 rule for this vid. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80/20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80/20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80/20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.